Hello everybody, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. So today's video is another introductory video. Today's video is one where I give you an overview of 4 practices from Hinduism which are considered very important to the spiritual path. Whether you practice one of them or all of them, they are considered pathways to the realization of the absolute, of the divine, of union with the divine. And I'm talking about the 4 yogas, the 4 main yogas identified by Swami Sivananda. So, yoga is a complex idea. A lot of people in the West have this reductive view of yoga. They think that it just means physical exercise, doing stretches and things like that on a yoga mat, but it's so much more than that. Yoga is a whole series of different practices, many and varied practices of all sorts, with the sole objective of union with the divine, or to put it in the terms of the Hindu traditions themselves, union with Brahman, which is, as an idea, the absolute reality behind the illusory, limited nature of existence, the ineffable, the infinite, the source of all life, that to which life will return because it is endless and formless, and that which, because it is eternal, is also the source of ultimate truth. This is how Brahman is described, and it's roughly equivalent to the Western idea of the divine or God, whether personal or impersonal, whatever your concept of that is. I prefer an impersonal concept of God, and I'll explain why in a later video, but whatever your idea of that ultimate transcendent reality is, that is what you're trying to reach with yoga. And yoga, in its essence, is really a type of spiritual practice, which is a religious practice. Now, people misinterpret what the word religion means. They think that the word religion simply means an organized or institutionalized form of spirituality, when in fact the root of the word religion is the Latin religare, which means a binding together, a union. And the word yoga, likewise, is a Sanskrit word which means a kind of union or binding together. And the union, of course, is the union of the human being with the divine. And so that is the objective of religious practices. And not all spiritual practices are religious. There are spiritual practices that you can use to get knowledge or insight into this or that philosophical question. There's spiritual practices that you can do to make your own life run more smoothly, but these don't have the direct objective of union with that which is beyond the world, beyond the need to fulfill this or that desire, whereas the objective of union with the absolute, with Brahman, with God, that is a transcendent goal. And once you have achieved that union, there's no more to be done, because that reality is perfect. And by experiencing that reality and being immersed in and becoming one with that reality, you experience a perfect satisfaction. And this is described in Vedanta and Hindu texts as bliss. So, although there are several forms of yoga that proliferate throughout Hindu tradition, Swami Sivananda identifies four that are the most important and the most effective. And those four practices really, together, give you a all-encompassing experience of union with the divine from a number of different angles. But each one also uniquely is a path to the divine, equally valid as any other one of the yogas. So the four main yogas identified by Sivananda are Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Raja Yoga. So I'll begin with Bhakti Yoga. Bhakti Yoga is the yoga of devotion. So this is a yoga where the basis of the practice is love, a pure, unconditional love for whatever form of the deity, whatever representation of God or the absolute that you have. You need to love God, you need to love the absolute, the divine, as you would love somebody who is very close to you. And that's the essence of bhakti. And it's more common than we know. Of course, in the West and in the Near East, there are forms of religion which could be described very easily as a form of bhakti. In particular, Jesus of Nazareth taught a form of bhakti. If you read the Gospel of John, it is absolutely describing a practice of bhakti yoga. That the way to God, the way to the divine, is through love. And it is said that bhakti yoga is the quickest and easiest way to the divine, because all that you need in order to practice it is love in your heart. So that's bhakti yoga, a very simple but beautiful practice. Then there's Jnana yoga. This is the yoga of contemplation. So it's a more intellectual based yoga. It's a yoga where the practice centers around largely contemplating spiritual ideas, theological ideas, and by contemplating them intellectually and going over them with your mind and penetrating more deeply into them with the intellect, eventually the nature of that knowledge transforms from an intellectual knowledge into a more direct knowledge of divinity. And that is the objective of the Jnana yoga practice. The third of the four is Karma yoga. Karma yoga is the yoga of work. So the problem of karma is that we go into the world, we are of the world, we live our lives, and we do things. And we do things because we want things. But what we want is always something limited, something that will pass away, and it's always something that creates consequences, which we then need to live through. And so our past karma creates future karma, and it's all futile because everything in this world passes away eventually. So karma yoga poses the question, what are you actually living for? If this is the case, if everything passes away, what is the point of your existence? And it gives the answer that you must live for the divine. You must dedicate your life to the divine in order for it to have meaning. And that means finding a way of dedicating the fruits of your work in day-to-day life to the divine, renouncing attachment to the fruits of your actions. And it also entails engaging in the kinds of actions that would be pleasing to the divine order, if you think about the implications of the practice. So that's karma yoga. And then the final practice of the four is the practice of Raja Yoga. This is called the royal yoga. The word Raja is closely related to the notion of royalty. In Raja Yoga, you're really trying to develop the will, and you're really trying to develop discipline and command and control over your mind and your body, so that you're enthroning your consciousness within your being, rather than allowing yourself to be the subject of the mind and your habits and so forth. So there's 8 different limbs to Raja Yoga. Those are Yama and Niyama, the moral practices. There's Asana, the physical postures. There's Pranayama, the control of the breath and the vital force. There's Pratyahara, which is withdrawal from mental activity. Dharana, which is concentration. Dhyana, which is meditation. And Samadhi, which is the result of meditation, which is union of subject with object and the experience of pure liberation of unlimited being and unlimited consciousness. And one thing that each of these successive limbs has in common is that it's training the will, it's strengthening the will and using it to master or gain control over the other parts of our being, such as the body and the mind and so on. And so that really is the essence of Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga is the yoga that I have practiced the most extensively, and I found it very beneficial for the reason that it incorporates meditation much more overtly than the other yogas do. So those are the 4 yogas. If you have the time, I would recommend trying all of them at some point in your life. Of course, focus on one practice at a time. But if you just choose one, then it's a really useful way of achieving that union with the absolute reality, with the divine, with Brahman, with God. And different types of people might have different kinds of proclivities, which mean that they're better suited to one yoga and not the other. So, for example, if you're somebody who's very intellectual, very academic or bookish, who likes academic types of learning and understanding things, then perhaps Jnana Yoga is the practice that you should engage in. If you're somebody who's very social, who enjoys relationships, who gets a lot of enjoyment out of relating to other people, perhaps Bhakti Yoga is for you. If you're somebody who likes to be in control of their own destiny and take initiative and try and really be the agent of change in their own life, perhaps Raja Yoga is for you. If you're somebody who's very career driven, who's very driven by having a project that you're working on, or somebody who's very practical, perhaps Karma Yoga is the best practice for you. But each one of these types of yoga illuminates a part of the experience of God which you wouldn't get from the others. So with Raja Yoga, you get an idea of the state of consciousness that is the experience of the divine. But it's just a state of consciousness. If you want to experience the divine as love, which is an important way of experiencing the divine, you really should practice Bhakti yoga to get that experience. But then neither of those will give you an intellectual understanding of the divine, and we need ideas and we need an intellectual understanding to really fully grasp something, and Jnana yoga can train you to approach the divine in that way. And of course, all of this can happen in a vacuum, so it's important that we're still in the real world and we're still finding a way to engage the world meaningfully, and karma yoga can be good for that. So every one of these yoga practices together gives a very well-rounded way of relating to the divine, and also of bringing spirituality into our lives in a way that is balanced. So those are the 4 yogas. Perhaps you would like to try one of them. I will do more detailed videos on each of the 4. I'll do a whole series on Raja Yoga because there's so many different limbs. But those videos are coming, and those are other practices that I would highly recommend for anyone on the path. So thank you again for listening. See you next time.